下面让我们用热烈的掌声有请美国前教育部部长 Emerson Collective 管理合伙人 Arne Duncan 先生带来主题演讲：机遇、挑战、紧迫，培养未来的创新者与领导者。有请。Our next keynote speaker is Ms. Arne Duncan, former U.S. Secretary of Education and managing partner at Emerson Collective. His speech topic is Opportunities, Challenges, and Urgency, Educating the Next Generation of Innovators and Leaders.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first time in China, first time in Beijing, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity. I thought I'd talk a little bit about what I've learned over the course of my lifetime in education, and I have some written questions from folks in the audience that I'll answer at the end. Education is our family business. I grew up on the campus of the University of Chicago, where my father was a professor. My mother ran an after-school tutoring program that was less than 2 miles from our house, but it was across an invisible barrier of 47th Street between what was middle class, integrated Hyde Park, where we lived, and all African American, all poor North Kenwood, Oakland. And going to her after-school program, literally from the time I was born, my sister and brother and I were raised as a part of her program, going to an after-school program way before we started real school, was an absolutely formative experience. And we've all tried to follow in her footsteps in various ways. I've done what I've done. My sister now trains principals for the Chicago Public Schools. Unfortunately, my mother contracted Alzheimer's a few years ago, and my brother now runs her program that started in 1961. Growing up, literally from the time I was born with her, with kids who live less than 2 miles from me, as smart, as talented, as hardworking, as committed as my sister and brother and I, but simply not having the kinds of opportunities we had, that contrast, that inequality is what's given me my passion for education all my life. And what I've seen from day one is that talent is a lot more evenly distributed than opportunity. And whether it's in Chicago, whether it's across the United States, whether it's internationally, for me, our job in education is always to help opportunity meet that talent. Now, I was fortunate to go to amazing elementary and high school, secondary schools, went to a wonderful college, have had great teachers and professors. But probably the best teacher I ever had was a young man named Kerry Holly. And the philosophy my mother had was that 15-year-olds taught 10-year-olds, and 10-year-olds taught 5-year-olds, so we all grew up teaching and being taught. And Kerry Holly was like a lot of young men in that community, never met his father. Mother was in and out of jail, raised by his grandmother. So all the risk factors, all the stereotypes of him not being able to make it. But because my mother and others were in his life, he was able to go on to work for IBM, to travel internationally, to have global patents in the tech space, to be the first African-American IBM fellow. And he grew up on the corner of 46th and Greenwood, where my mother's program was. Well, I'm thrilled for what he was able to do. I wonder about all the kids, whether it's here in China, or in Chicago, or anywhere on the planet, where they have that kind of talent, that kind of drive, that kind of ability, but don't have the opportunity. And I think the obligation, the opportunity for all of us together is to try and find ways to help that opportunity meet and nurture that extraordinary talent. After graduating from college, I played basketball overseas for 4 years in Australia. Loved doing that, met my wife there, brought her back to the United States, and came back to set up a small nonprofit working for my best friend, John Rogers, who ran Aerial Capital Management. And we started a small public school in the neighborhood where my mother's program was, called Aerial Community Academy, because there wasn't a good school for those kids to attend. Part of John's genius was to create a curriculum based upon financial literacy, because he was in the financial services sector. And that's a world that our kids knew nothing about, had no exposure. Our kids would go home and teach their parents about this and help them become more financially literate. Math scores have been fantastic for 20 years. That wasn't the reason why we did it. But giving kids a reason to be excited about being in school, being engaged. We start teaching financial literacy in kindergarten. By the time our students are in 6th grade, they start to invest real money in the stock market. not a stock market game, but $20,000 for each class. They have managed that portfolio every year very, very well. When they graduate in 8th grade, they give back the principal to the next 6th grade class. They make a philanthropic gift to the community, because I want young people, particularly poor students, to know that they can give back now and contribute, and they can also save money for college and have that money matched by John Rogers, helping them think long term. But thinking about how we find kids' passions, how we find their interests, how do we give them a reason to be excited about going to school, that was a huge lesson. I left there to go work for the Chicago Public Schools. Did that for 10 years, 7.5 years. I was a CEO there. I can talk about many successes, I can talk about many failures, but I'll talk about one that's a little bit of both. We were always trying to raise standards and have more of our children not just graduate from high school, but go on to college. To do that, you have to take academically rigorous classes. So we pushed very, very hard to have more young people take AP classes, advanced placement classes, because if you do that while you're in high school and get college credit, it makes college cheaper, but also helps our students, many of whom were first-generation college goers, to start to know that college is possible for them. And over 4 years, we worked very, very hard with our high school principals and teachers. We had 100 high schools across the city. And in 4 years, we were able to double the number of high school students taking and passing AP classes. We celebrated that and congratulated everybody for their hard work and thanked our students for their commitment. But at the end of that celebration, we had all of our teachers there, all of our principals, our high school team. I asked them a simple question. I said, do any of you think our students are twice as smart today than they were 4 years ago? And the room got real quiet. But so, of course, they weren't twice as smart over 4 years. Hopefully they were a little bit smarter. But what had happened historically, we in education, we who commit our lives to helping young people succeed, we had low expectations for our young people. We didn't think they could pass. We didn't think they could succeed taking these more rigorous classes. We had denied them opportunity. And far too often in education, whether it's students who are poor, whether it's minority students, whether it's immigrant students, our low expectations hold them back from achieving their dreams. So they weren't twice as smart. They simply had some opportunities to take some higher level classes that they had never had before. And they went on to do extraordinarily well. From there, I was lucky enough to go work for President Obama, who was a good friend. He and I had grown up playing basketball together and doing education policy together in Chicago. He became President of the United States. It's not very often in life where your friend becomes President of the United States. Probably will never happen again. And my wife and I had a 1-second conversation about going to D.C., and of course the answer was yes. And it was an amazing opportunity to look at the national level and to try and lead education policy, not for 400,000 students in Chicago, but for 53 million students. Raising standards across the board, trying to take the lessons that my mother taught us, trying to make college more accessible and affordable, pushing high school graduation rates to all-time highs. Those were things I was proud of. But of everything I say we're proud of, for me, it's never mission accomplished. This is always an ongoing journey. We were able to get high school graduation rates up to 84%, which was a historic high. I wish the current administration was more focused on getting that to 90%. But while we are pleased with that progress, I want to be extraordinarily clear. 84% high school graduation rates meant that there were hundreds of thousands of young people leaving high school, dropping out of high school each year, 700,000. And those young people in today's globally competitive economy basically don't have a chance to be successful. So we always have to be committed to getting better faster and trying to accelerate the pace of change. What have I seen all my life? Education is the surest path out of poverty. In fact, I have never known, don't think there ever will be a better path out of poverty. And if we're trying to break cycles of poverty, if we're trying to give young people a chance to sit in rooms like this and be in conferences like this, you can't do that without providing them with a world-class education. So we have to commit to doing that better. If we want to maintain a middle class where people can own a home and support a family, the best way to do that is through education. In my home in the United States, if we want to have a civically engaged democracy, if we want people to be part of the civic fabric, it's hard to do that when you're not educated, when you're on the sidelines. And then finally, leaving DC with my family and coming back home to Chicago, I've been laser focused on reducing violence in Chicago. And I love my city. My city raised me, gave me every opportunity educationally, academically, socially, culturally, athletically. But we have a level of gun violence that's absolutely devastating in Chicago, and far too many of our young people are losing their lives. Chicago is 7 times more violent than New York City. And we have children growing up with a level of fear and trauma that's absolutely unacceptable. So I'm now working with the young men, 17 to 24-year-olds, who are most likely to shoot each other or be shot. And unfortunately, that profile is the same. Every story is different, but what do they have in common? The vast majority of our young men never graduated from high school. Not one of them has a college degree. 2 weeks ago, I started meeting with one of the leading gang leaders in Chicago, getting to know him, trying to build some trust, seeing if we could help him and his guys transition from the illegal economy that leads to violence to the legal economy. I always ask young men to tell me their stories. He said he was illiterate until he was 17 and went to jail. And the fact that he couldn't read and write helped to fuel a lot of his rage and a lot of his behavior. And so whether it's trying to break cycles of poverty, whether it's trying to maintain a vibrant middle class, or whether it's trying to break cycles of violence and just help people keep alive, I don't know a more effective tool for accomplishing those things than trying to meet children where they are and give them a great, great education. Today, education is more important than ever before, and everyone's here knows that. We have a flat world. We have a globally competitive economy. I'm not that old, but when I was in high school on the south side of Chicago, it wasn't great, but it wasn't the end of the world if my friends dropped out of high school, and some did. And they could go work in the stockyards or steel mills and own a home and support a family and have a pretty good life. Those jobs are gone, and they're never coming back. And when young people leave our schools, when they go to the streets, we basically condemn them to poverty and social failure. And so the stakes for education, I would argue, have never been higher than they are today. I'm going to close with just a couple thoughts, and happy to have debate or talk it through or hear any disagreement. Then I have some questions that people submit. I'll answer those. But just sort of 6 thoughts that over the course of my lifetime in education that I've come to believe, and frankly believe very, very strongly. First, the best investment we can make is in high-quality early childhood education. There's nothing more important than getting our babies, our 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, off to a good start in life. I saw that all my life growing up in my mother's program. I saw what she could do with young kids who came to her as babies, how it was harder when kids came to her at 12, 13, 14. So I've known that anecdotally forever. But then Dr. James Heckman, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist at the University of Chicago, has studied the longitudinal impact of early childhood education and has found it has a 7-to-1 ROI, 7-to-1 return on investment. That for every dollar we invest in high-quality pre-K, we increase high school graduation rates, we reduce dropout rates, we increase college-going rates, we reduce incarceration rates, we increase those going into the workforce, not those who are unemployed. And for all of us who are taxpayers, very rarely you get a 7-to-1 return on investment for those dollars you invest. And so for all the other things we need to do along the education continuum, I always say we have to stop playing catch-up. We have to get out of the catch-up business and get our babies off to a good start. Investing in universal access to high-quality pre-K. I would argue if we could only do one thing, that would be where I would put my last dollar. Secondly, poverty is not destiny. And far too often in education, we try and explain away why children who come from disadvantaged communities, be that inner city urban or rural or remote, why they struggle. Again, all my life, I saw young people who happened to be extraordinarily poor go on to do very, very well because my mother and others were helping them to be successful academically. If you look at the OECD data, there's huge variation in how children who come from disadvantaged backgrounds perform. In fact, poor children from Shanghai perform much better in math than wealthy children from my home country of the United States. There's tremendous variation across countries. There's tremendous variation within countries. There's tremendous variation within schools and between schools. When I ran the Chicago Public Schools, we had 600 schools. Many were 90, 95%, 100% filled with children who live below the poverty line. In some of those schools, 90% of those students were performing at grade level, who were doing extraordinarily well. In other schools, that was only more like 10, 15%. Huge variation. Poverty is never destiny, and all of us, I think, have to be committed to helping those children who aren't born with the privileges that I had of having two educated parents. How do we help children who are first-generation college goers be successful? That has to be what this collective work is about. Easy to say, harder to do. So how do we make sure we create opportunity for every single young person? My third point, and this relates to that point, is that equal is not equity. If we're trying to close opportunity gaps, giving everyone the same thing, making everything equal, is not the same as equity. And I'm focused not on equality, but on equity. Equity means giving every single child what they need to be successful. Equal is giving every child access to a teacher. Equality is giving our poorest children access to the best teachers, to the best technology, to longer school days, if that's what they need. Equity, for me in Chicago, meant that we were feeding tens of thousands of students not one meal a day, not 2 meals a day, but 3 meals a day, because we worried about them not eating at home. My kids are fine. Many other kids are going to be fine. But for a lot of our kids, if they're hungry, it's hard to concentrate on what's going on in school. Equity, for me, meant sending a couple thousand kids home very quietly, very discreetly on Fridays with a backpack full of food because we worried about them not eating over that weekend. Equity meant providing eyeglasses, providing dental exams, providing social workers and counselors when our kids are living with grief and trauma and fear. So for me, the focus on education can't just be on making things equal. It's got to be on equality and determining at the individual child level, at the personalized level, exactly what every child needs to fulfill their true talent. Fourth, a couple points about teachers. Teachers change lives. Teachers are the most important factor in the in-school experience for young people. And for me, this is never about just test scores or graduation rates. I recently wrote a book called How Schools Work. In that book, I talk about a study that economist from Harvard, Raj Chetty, did. And he looked longitudinally at the impact of one good teacher on students' lives in New York City. And he found one good teacher in the middle school years increased the lifetime earnings in that class by $250,000. And I happen to think it's probably not just the content that that teacher was delivering, but it was believing in young people and helping them envision a positive future for themselves and helping them think about doing some things that they may have thought was impossible. And so the most important thing we can do is to help find and nurture and support those great teachers and help them be master and mentor teachers and help them serve more students, help them nurture and support and mentor the next generation of teachers. But think about the cumulative impact of 3 good teachers in a row on a student. And on the reverse side, think about the cumulative negative impact of 3 mediocre teachers in a row on that student. Secondly, smaller class size is something that is very popular politically often. It's very popular as parents. I think all of us as parents, my wife and I have 2 kids at home, we would all love smaller class sizes. But I would argue that quality is more important than the size of the class. That paying teachers more, that giving them more time for their own professional development is probably the better investment. And let me give you a little thought experiment I often check with people. as parents, many of us in the room are parents, let's say we were given a choice of having our child, it's got to be personal, our child go to a teacher who was mediocre or go to a teacher that was a great teacher. Let's say the class size for the mediocre teacher was 20. Let's say the class size for the great teacher was 25. Would you take that trade? I would take that trade. Let's say that class size was 30. Would you still take that trade? I would. I would actually go substantially higher than that as a parent to give my child access to a fantastic educator. I think other countries, frankly, have thought about this in more thoughtful ways than we often have in the United States. And then finally on teachers, there's always a debate, I think you guys talked about it earlier in the conference, of whether somehow technology will replace teachers. I would argue that's never going to happen. I think great technology coupled with great teaching has been proven time and time again. Blended learning, effective blended learning is the best way to accelerate student learning. Technology can be an extraordinarily important tool. Teachers, not just in the content knowledge, but on the relationship side, are invaluable. And I think we can all point to those teachers in our lives, not a technology, but teachers who saw things in us that we didn't see in ourselves and helped us envision things that maybe we thought weren't possible. And so the human piece of this is always going to be critical. Fifth, this next generation of learners, they're not going to go looking for jobs. They're going to create jobs. They're going to solve problems. And so how we train the next generation of leaders, of entrepreneurs, of civic leaders, of government officials, of tech leaders, has to be radically different. Joy's son gave me a ride in from the airport yesterday. He's 15. He wants to go into AI. He's not going to go look for a job somewhere. He's going to go find a problem someplace and go figure out how to solve that problem. So content knowledge is always going to be important. I don't want to downplay that. But I would argue that more than ever before, the habits of mind, that skill sets are as important or more important for this next generation of learners and leaders. The ability to think critically, the ability to synthesize information, the ability to work and collaborate and be part of a diverse team, the chance to have a joy for learning and to be a lifelong learner and to be motivated by problems, not intimidated by them. I think those skill sets, probably more so than any specific content knowledge, are what our students need more than ever. What they don't need is rote memorization of facts. What they don't need is a sense of complacency or a false sense of security that somehow they have mastered content because they've finished algebra, finished biology, or finished chemistry or physics. They have to be wanting to learn the rest of their lives. And helping our students become lifelong learners, help them work in teams, have them embrace problems. That's what's going to help them be successful and help our world ultimately be successful. The final point, and then I'll take a couple of questions, is that while I think it's very appropriate, and I understand it, for countries and nations to compete athletically in the Olympics and to compete maybe economically, I will always believe education has to be the place where all of us have to collaborate. This is not a zero-sum game. This is a rising tide lifts all boats. When I was the Secretary of Education, we held an international summit every year. We had about two dozen countries. We met throughout the globe. They were either rapidly improving, I'm always looking at who's getting better faster, or high achieving. And what I learned from my counterparts, from other education officials in other nations, was absolutely invaluable. And yes, there are some differences culturally, but the similarity of challenges, whether it's in urban areas, whether it's in rural areas, whether it's with migrant children, whether it's with children who are born to disadvantage, those commonality of challenge and what I was able to learn from my peers and colleagues was extraordinarily beneficial. And I would hope that spirit, that's actually why I'm here today, is I miss those chances to travel internationally. I miss those chances to learn from my colleagues and peers. And the more we can be open and honest with each other, the more we can talk not just about our strengths and our victories, but we can talk about those things where we struggle and need some help. Those answers are being solved somewhere on the planet. And helping each other, helping us get better, I think is exactly the right thing to do. And collectively, we can do so much to solve the problems that face us. People worry about work going away. Work to me is about solving problems. And whether you look locally, whether you look internationally, there's no shortage of problems that we need to solve. What we need is the smartest, the most committed, the most entrepreneurial, the most creative thinkers from across countries solving those problems and solving those problems together. And that will take us to a very different place. Let me stop there. I have 5 minutes. I had a number of good questions. I'll try and race through them as quickly as I can that came in. David Wu asked, as Secretary of Education, I saw a massive and wide-ranging portfolio. What areas of education did you focus most of your time and attention on, and how do you prioritize those things? And we fought every day to try and prioritize and not try and do 50 different things, so I think that perpetuates mediocrity. So a couple areas of focus. We tried to significantly increase access to high-quality pre-K, put more than $1 billion behind that, was able to get an additional couple 100,000 students around the United States to get access there. So that was a huge area of focus. Secondly, focused on increasing high school graduation rates and talked about being able to get that to 84%. And then finally, we didn't go as far as I would have liked, but trying to make college more accessible, more affordable for all. We were able to get an additional $40 billion for Pell Grants. Pell Grants help low-income students go to college. We were able to secure $40 billion without going back to taxpayers for a nickel, and felt very, very good about that. Secondly, May Barclay, why do you think so many Chinese students want to study in the US, and what can we learn from each other? I think the US higher education system is obviously an extraordinarily strong one. Don't know if it's the best in the world, but it's definitely one of the best in the world. That chance to have academic freedom, to think creatively, to learn some entrepreneurial skills, I think that's hugely important. But I also think it's so important for us in the United States to learn from Chinese students and to know China. I'm embarrassed. This is my first time ever coming to China. I hope to be able to come here many more times. I want young people to grow up culturally competent internationally. And so for me, the learning is never a one-way street. It's always a two-way street. And there's so much that students in the United States can learn, not just in class from Chinese students, but by sharing a dorm room, or sharing a club, or eating together in the cafeteria. Those are the kinds of experiences that everyone benefits from. Third, how can we communicate with students in low-income and under-resourced communities about the importance of education? I would argue that no one understands the importance of education more than those who haven't had it, more than low-income families. And I spent my life working in low-income communities on the south and west sides of Chicago, and I've never met a parent yet who didn't want what's best for their child, didn't want them to have a great education. What for me has been lacking is not the will, is not the aspiration, it's been the opportunity. And people talk about achievement gaps. I don't talk about achievement gaps, I talk about opportunity gaps. And if we close those opportunity gaps, if we bring education to where people are, great technology, great teachers, great schools, great after-school programs, great mentors, then our young people can do extraordinary things. Do you think the Common Core standards have achieved what they were set out to accomplish? Why or why not? So we pushed a fairly controversial plan to try and raise standards in the United States. It's not something we could mandate, it's something we incentivized and learned a lot about the power and incentives for states. And what we were able to do is see our hope, our dream was maybe half the states, maybe 25 states would adopt higher standards. What we've actually seen is closer to between 40 and 45 states adopt higher standards, simply meaning young people can graduate from high school, prepare to take college-level classes in college, not to have to take remedial classes. So that was hard, and there's some things that we maybe did wrong in terms of marketing the idea or communicating it, but making sure all students across the United States have access to high standards was absolutely the right fight, and see the vast majority of states take significant steps in the right direction. That's one of the things I actually feel very good about. Education policy can be a controversial topic. How do you balance diverse stakeholders, students, parents, teachers? Education can be very, very political. We have to focus on what's right for students. That has to drive every single policy conversation we have. We as adults need to compromise. We as adults need to drop our egos. We need to drop our fiefdoms, our bureaucracies, and it's our collective job to fight on behalf of students. What's something that people don't know about President Obama and his work in education? President Obama had remarkable courage. And what he always said to me is, Arne, you figure out what the right thing to do is for children and let me worry about the politics. And he was willing to spend political capital and lose political capital if that was the right thing for kids. And having that kind of courage gave me and my team a freedom that was pretty extraordinary. And for that, I'm always going to be unbelievably grateful. Last two questions. You like to play basketball? What are the competencies related to basketball and education? What's the role there? I've been lucky to go to some great schools throughout my life, but I always say the basketball court was probably my greatest teacher, and all the life lessons of hard work, of being a good teammate, of working towards long-term goals, deferring gratification. All those lessons were lessons I learned probably more in the basketball court than in class. Final question. From a Teach for China teacher, and I love that program. What's your philosophy of education in one sentence? I think I would simply say, help every child discover their genius. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great morning.
感谢 Arne Duncan 先生的精彩演讲。Thank you, Mr. Arne Duncan, for a remarkable speech.